You know how every once in a while you come across a piece of media that you personally really love, but that you're hesitant to recommend to other people because you know it's not everyone's cup of tea? Well, that's sort of how I feel about The Three Body Problem, both the book series and the recent television adaptation. So a little bit of background. I read the Three Body Problem book series for the first time last year, and I really enjoyed it. I talked about it a little bit on this channel. Currently, there are 3 different adaptations of this series in progress. The first one of these that came out a couple months ago was a Chinese animation that, from everything I've heard, was really bad. Apparently it didn't respect the source material at all and made some questionable choices with some of the characters. Bruh. Also, I couldn't find any versions that had English subtitles. The second adaptation is a Chinese live-action TV series, which is what I'm reviewing here. And that one is really, really good, which I'll be getting into in a second. The third one, unlike the other two, is being produced in the States by Netflix. And I'm really not too optimistic about that one because it's being made by the same people who are responsible for the final 3 seasons of Game of Thrones. And they don't really seem like the kind of people who are going to have a lot of respect for the source material. But honestly, after this current adaptation, I don't really see any need for there to be a Netflix adaptation. And I'm actually on the fence about whether or not I'll even watch it. So going into this Tencent adaptation, I had basically no expectations because, for one thing, I've never watched a Chinese drama before, so I just didn't know much about this medium. But also I just couldn't find much information about the show beforehand, and so I had no idea what the vision was. I was shocked when I found out that season 1, which only covers the first book, is going to include 30 episodes. And consequently, I was a little bit worried about the pacing because the first book is only like 400 pages and 30, 45-minute episodes seems like a lot just for that. But I started watching it anyway, and boy oh boy was I pleasantly surprised. This show was clearly made by people who are really passionate about the original book, because this is genuinely one of the most accurate book-to-television adaptations I have ever seen. For the first few episodes, in fact, I was almost worried because it's almost a scene-by-scene recreation of every moment from the books, to the extent that I was thinking that it was going to be boring to watch this show because I had already read the books and it's almost like watching an audiobook in visual form. Fortunately though, after a few episodes, the pace really does start to pick up. And while going forward, there are changes made to the original source material. Almost all of them make perfect sense and really improve the story, I think. Oh, and just a heads up, this review is going to be mostly spoiler-free, but with a short spoiler section at the end. And most of the positive changes that this adaptation made to the book was in the characters. In the book, the characters really just serve as a way of introducing the plot. The main character, Wang Miao, is just incredibly one-dimensional. He doesn't really serve any purpose other than to just go from place to place and find out information. And even more fleshed out characters like Ye and Jia are not that interesting. But this show knew exactly what to do with its characters, and with its extended runtime, it really fleshes them out in so many amazing ways. So there are kind of 2 plot lines in this television series, one taking place in the modern day, and one taking place in the 1960s. In the modern day plotline, the 2 central characters are Wang Miao and Da Shi, and the 2 of them kind of serve as foils to each other. Wang Miao is this incredibly rational applied physicist who is normally very calm, but at certain points in the series suffers existential breakdowns when he's confronted with certain information about the true nature of the universe. He is just very tied to his experiments and his own perception of reality. And when it seems like that perception of reality is threatened, he really just starts to suffer and becomes rather inept. But what saves him repeatedly through this series is Da Shi, who is sort of the opposite. He's kind of a representation of absurdism in that he's this very practically minded police officer who doesn't get the big deal with physics or the nature of reality at a deep level, and really props up Wang Miao and helps him overcome his bouts of existential dread. And the relationship between these 2 main characters is just so fun to watch, and the actors are so good. I think their relationship brings out one of the core themes of the series, which was there in the books but not nearly as prominent, and that is coping with existential dread. If I'm being honest, in a lot of ways I can relate to Wang Miao, because every once in a while, just for whatever reason, I find myself hyperfixating on deep, fundamental, unanswerable questions about life and reality, and we all need someone like Dasha every once in a while to bring us back down to reality. And I think there's something just so fundamental about the dynamic between the two of them, and something so human that just wasn't there as strongly in the books and is brought so much to the forefront here. And then in the 1960s plotline, you have Yeonjia, who is just a way more sympathetic character than she was in the books. Yeonjia is central to the story because of a certain decision that she makes that changes the course of human history. And her portrayal in this TV series is such that when she makes that decision, it genuinely doesn't seem like there's anything else she would have done. She suffers a lot of trauma in her early life that really goes on to influence her perception of humanity as a whole. And a lot of her motivations are deeply tied to this idea she has that humanity is inherently destructive, and that for the good of the rest of the world, for the good of the rest of the species in the world, something needs to be done about humanity. Hollywood these days, for whatever reason, really like to do these type of radical environmentalist villains, but this is one of the only times where I've seen it actually done well, where it seems like her reasons for hating humanity are understandable given the lot she's had in life. And this show also does a really good job of portraying her regret over the things that she did later on in the present day plotline where she's an older woman. Just the actresses for both young and old Yeonjia really knocked it out of the park. So as the title of this review implies though, I do want to talk about some reasons why you might not want to watch this show. And one of the big ones is the pacing. The pacing really suffers, especially in the middle of this series. There are entire episodes where it feels like nothing really happens, and there are some plot lines added in that don't necessarily go anywhere that important or affect the plot in any meaningful way. There was still enough there that I enjoyed every episode, but definitely don't watch this series expecting the plot to go anywhere quickly. There are times where it definitely feels like character decisions are a little bit silly and arbitrary for the extent of dragging out the runtime, where it seems like characters could figure something out if they just thought about it for 2 seconds, but the writers are kind of just not letting them because this has to be 30 episodes. Ultimately, the show probably would have been better as 20 episodes, but still I really do like how the longer format allows the book to be expanded upon in ways that wouldn't have been possible in just like a normal 8 or 10 episode TV series. Then there are a couple of minor things that some people find really annoying. One is that the non-Chinese actors in this series are kind of meh at best, which is a little bit distracting if you're watching it as a non-Chinese speaking viewer. Fortunately, there aren't that many huge English-speaking roles in this series, but when there are some weird quirks. Like the audio for one English-speaking character is dubbed by somebody else who doesn't speak English as well as that actor does, and it's just such a bizarre decision that I have no idea why that was done. And that's not the only example of dubbing in this series. There are some weird cases where entire characters have their voices changed. Like the character Mushing, apparently, all of her lines were dubbed by another actress, and it's kind of noticeable. Which leads me into another point, that the audio in this series is a little bit weird. Aside from the dubbing, there's also just all sorts of music that's ripped from other sources. Like I noticed soundtracks from Inception, Interstellar, Dune, and Blade Runner 2049, just to name a few, just inserted into this series almost verbatim, and it's really noticeable. The original soundtrack for the series is really quite good, and there's lots of great original music written for it. But I guess when you have 30 episodes of a television series, you kind of run out of original music and have to rip it from other sources. And somehow they got the rights to those pieces of music and just kind of throw them in there. Also, do be aware that if you watch the series on YouTube, there are some parts that are randomly silent, or where the audio is replaced by other audio due to copyright issues. You can watch the entire series for free on YouTube, but that is sometimes an issue, although it's not frequent. So some fans were really distracted by this stuff. Personally, I didn't find any of it that distracting, and I still enjoyed every moment of this show regardless, because it's just really well made. It's so rare to see a science fiction series get this big of an adaptation, and not just any science fiction series, but a series that includes lots of concepts that might not necessarily be familiar to mass audiences. This series touches on things like string theory and cosmology, all without really featuring any of the big action sequences that you would expect from a sci-fi series. It's much more about the themes and the ideas than it is about like fighting in spaceships with lasers and stuff like that. Which means that there are a lot of scenes where characters are just kind of standing around talking, often with dialogues ripped directly out of the books, and explaining scientific concepts in ways that I could imagine would be aggravating to a lot of viewers. But for me, it's just such a breath of fresh air that we actually get a TV show like this. It's really a miracle that this thing got made at all. Originally, apparently, the producers were planning to go a completely different route with it and make it much more action-focused. And I'm so glad they didn't. When the show does include, like, exciting action-filled parts, though, it does it really well. Something like 25% of the budget went into the penultimate episode, which fans of the books will remember as being a very memorable sequence that was somehow adapted just so perfectly in this. It's the sort of scene that I thought would be impossible to portray, but they really just nailed the tension and the bizarreness of that scene, and it's just really great. So I'll go into spoilers here in a second, but to wrap up, I just want to say, I haven't seen a show quite like this before. It seemed to come out of nowhere, but it clearly is a labor of love, and the producers have worked on it for the last 7 years. So it really is just, it's something special. And I'm just glad it got made as somebody who's a huge fan of the books. I am nervous about book 2 because book 2 is going to be significantly harder to adapt, but the second season has been greenlit, so we'll see if it takes another 7 years for them to produce that season and see how it goes. Otherwise, yeah. All right, so getting into spoilers, I just want to talk a little bit about the ending. Because the last episode, I loved it, but also was a little bit disappointed in it. The main reason I was disappointed was because the Sophon unfolding scene was not as epic as it was in the books. And while I kind of wish they had dug a little bit more into that sequence, because it was my favorite scene in the books, I kind of get it, because the stuff that the books describe is basically impossible to imagine, yet alone portray in a television series. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't sure if that scene would even make it into the series, yet alone be adapted exactly as it was. So I'm a little disappointed, but I think I'm happy it made it in. However, the scene that concludes the series, where Dasha, Wang Miao, and Ding Yi are all standing in that field with the bugs flying all around, and Dasha is giving that amazing speech, that scene is just so beautiful. It's the perfect encapsulation of the themes of this series about the strength of humanity. And I love how it brings the entire plot full circle, because Ye Wenjie's original decision to betray humanity was provoked by her reading Silent Spring, which was a book about the use of industrial pesticides and how it's harming the environment. And now you have Dasha explaining how bugs continue to thrive despite the use of industrial pesticides to kill them. It's just really beautiful. And that scene was sort of forgettable in the books, but they make it into like a moment here. And I just loved it. It actually brought a tear to my eye, which is very rare for me. I'm gonna wrap up here in a second, but I just want to do a quick rundown of a few other standout moments in this show, because there were so many that I just loved. So a few of my favorites: Wang Miao yelling at Shen Yufei over the phone in episode 4 after shutting down his nano research project. And then in the following episode, Dasha bringing Wang Miao out of his existential crisis by just drinking with him and having a good time. And then after that, Dasha going outside and doing that dance. That was very funny. All of the times when Wang Miao's daughter helped him figure out the 3-body problem through these like childlike stories, that was really nice. The flashbacks with Yang Dong trying to live a normal life with Ding Yi after figuring out that physics is all a lie and trying to ignore that but ultimately failing, those were just really beautiful scenes. The depiction of the Trisolaran human computer was awesome. The couple of scenes where Luo Ji shows up, the main character of the second book, were really awesome and just got me excited for season 2. The montage of Ye Wenjie reading Silent Spring at the work camp, Dasha babysitting Wang Miao's daughter, Xu Bingbing going out of her way to protect Wang Miao during the ETO raid. Also just every scene with Xu Bingbing, she's really awesome. Shen Yufei's death scene, along with the perhaps unintentional Blade Runner reference. Ye Wenjie reuniting with her mother who betrayed her in episode 26. Dasha finding out about his condition and purposefully not telling Wang Miao because he's afraid of the emotional effect it will have on him. The villagers of Kijiatun donating their blood to save Ye Wenjie's life. And, of course, the whole of Operation Gusheng, which was just marvelous. It was a wonderful sequence, very nail-biting and exciting. Okay, I feel like this is getting to be a very long review for a series that I know not all of my audience is necessarily going to be interested in. But you know, I wanted to talk about it. I really love this series. I'm excited about it, and I had a lot to say. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And if you've watched the series, let me know what you thought of it in the comments. Thank you.